Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome back. I'm doing another franchise revisit here. Unlike the Fright Night and Scream ones, where I put all the videos up within 1 week, which I think was a little bit overboard for those. This one I'm going to be running a little bit closer to what I did for Friday the 13th and A Nightmare on Elm Street, where I'll put up one every week or two, as I try to not just revisit these Phantasm films, all 5 of them, but wrap my head around them, because there are a lot of aspects of these films that have never made sense to me. So if you haven't seen them, I would at least suggest checking out the first one. If you want to bite the bullet and buy physical media, they have a set where you get all 5 of them for anywhere from $25 to $45. They're also available on Shudder, all except for part 2, which I don't have the rights to, I guess. But go ahead and watch the first movie. Tell me, think about, what you get from it, and come back and see if any of the weird questions or ideas that I have, you actually have an answer to. So basically with the first one, I'd only seen it once back in the 80s. It was difficult to track down back then. And my local video stores were all getting bought up by Blockbuster, who for some reason the locations around me just weren't even carrying it. But so the one I was most familiar with growing up was part 2, because it was kind of on high rotation on cable. So a quick little, well, not even quick, but like a full synopsis of this before we dive into like the real spoiler-ridden kind of stuff is that this is what the movie's supposed to be about. The residents of a small town have begun dying under strange circumstances, leading young Mike to investigate. After discovering that the tall man, the town's mortician, is killing and reanimating the dead as misshapen zombies, Mike seeks help from his older brother Jody and local ice cream man Reggie. Working together, they try to lure out and kill the tall man, all while avoiding his minions and a deadly silver sphere. So even with it all laid out like that, it sounds kind of confusing as to exactly what's going on. But yeah, I've seen this one a few times, and this is the last time I decided I'm going to take some notes, try to make sense of everything, and sure enough, by the end, there were still things that I didn't understand. So I kind of get the overall feel of what's happening here. We get people are dying in this town. The mortuary is run by this tall man, and he seems to be stealing these bodies, putting them into these little barrels to compress them and send them into another dimension where they are turned into these little evil Jawa looking things. So the kid Mike sees that something's going on, and him and his friends basically try to stop it. But here's what's kind of confusing is that we get this very strange feel with these movies in general. I noticed this time watching it that there's not a lot of other characters. I know some of that's probably because budget is a very small production, but everything seems like these towns are almost half empty. They're kind of like a dreamlike state and everything. Some of it just doesn't make any sense. Little things like when Mike goes to the fortune teller and they have that little box that he puts his hand in, and it's like almost like a scene out of Dune or something. And the box disappears, and Mike just doesn't even react that much to this box completely vanishing in front of him. When he does sneak in to the mortuary, sees these terrible things, sees a person killed, comes back with a chopped off finger, I think it was from the tall man, which then turns into this other creature. When he is explaining all this to his brother Jody, and Jody sees it, Jody accepts it very quickly and doesn't even seem all that surprised. He doesn't seem quite as freaked out as I would think somebody would be when they see some weird apparent interdimensional creature. And then with Reggie, that's another one. He's just this very laid-back guy. He likes to play guitar, sell ice cream. There's not much going on there. But when everything starts going down, Reggie just jumps right in. He's ready to fight, ride or die. There's no big issue there. So their lack of reactions and this world having this weird kind of feel to it was hard for me to wrap my head around, but I think I got the gist of the story. They found out what was happening there. They're going to go and take out the tall man. They go there and they take him out. Everything's cool, except when we get to this ending. So Reggie gets stabbed, and so he's stabbed by the blonde woman that we've seen throughout this film. He apparently dies, but as he's dying, we see this woman changing into the tall man, like back and forth, and ending as being the tall man. So I don't know if that means that the tall man was actually in disguise as a blonde woman, if he was just projecting the blonde woman and she's some sort of ghost or hallucination, or what the deal is. But although the stuff with the blonde woman is already pretty confusing, then it gets even more confusing to where Mike is telling this story to Reggie, and Reggie just says that basically everything that we saw as the audience members was just a dream that Mike was having, a nightmare to cope with the loss of Jody, who had died in a car accident. So to deal with all this, they're like, well, let's just, get our minds off of all these terrible things that happened with, your brother being dead, and let's go on a road trip. So Mike goes upstairs and to start packing for this, and then the tall man shows up and breaks through the mirror. So does that mean that everything that Mike said was true? And if so, how is it that Reggie is still alive? And then why would Reggie be lying about it? Did all these things that happened in a dream happen technically in some other dimension and Reggie wasn't a part of that? And the situation with what happened with Jody isn't part of this? Like, what does that ending actually mean? And what are your thoughts on that ending if you've seen it? Just little things like how dreamy it is, how weird the music is, the box disappearing, Jody just, jumping right into accepting everything so easily, as did Reggie. Reggie dies, yet it was a blonde woman who killed him. That might have been a tall man. And then they wake up and it's all explained away as a dream and they're going to go on a road trip, but the tall man is still there. So does that just mean that what's happening now with Mike waking up, being told by Reggie that it's all a dream, was that whole scene itself just a dream? I love the movie, but that ending doesn't make any sense to me. So I'm wondering, what do you think of that ending? How do you interpret it? And was this something that you thought of from watching the movies, or did you see like interviews with the writer-director, or did you read other articles where people tried to break it down? Sound off in the comments. And while you're sounding off in the comments, also be sure to like and subscribe and hit that bell, because I'm going to do one for part 2, because part 2 I also have some weird questions about. But anyways, like I said, I really do like these movies, but the ending of Phantasm makes no sense, as do some of the other beats within it. So like I said, sound off. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell, and I will see you in the next one. Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome back to the second installment on my attempt to figure out these Phantasm films, which, though I really enjoyed them, and I've seen some of them several times through, whether on their own or part of this Christmas episode of The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob Briggs and Darcy the Mail Girl on Shudder, I still have a hard time figuring out various aspects of these films, no matter which one it is. So for this one, I'm going to recap and try to wrap my head around Phantasm II from 1988. The official synopsis from the back of the Blu-ray is as follows. After several years in a mental hospital, Mike escapes and joins forces with pal Reggie to hunt down and destroy the sinister tall man once and for all. Mike's telepathic visions lead them on a journey through devastated small-town America and ultimately to a blood-curdling confrontation with killer chrome death machines, hooded monsters, and the tall man's vision of hell on Earth. Okay, so my notes on this were pretty straightforward, and I feel like I kind of followed it a little bit better than the first one, and honestly, this is the one that I think I've probably seen the most, at least the most times growing up. As, like I mentioned in the previous video, the local Blockbuster locations by me just for some reason never carried the first one, but part 2 was always available on cable, so I was always coming across it. So there are some things that still stood out in this one that didn't quite I didn't really quite understand, and some other questions that I kind of had, or certain things that kind of stood out. So, first one is that Mike was living with Reggie for some reason, and this kind of stood out from the last movie as well. At least that's what it looked like. He says, let's go on this road trip, and Mike goes upstairs to his room, but they're at Reggie's place. So, maybe part of this flashback and dream kind of stuff is that, maybe the ending of the first movie was right and that all of it was a dream, and just somehow the tall man is still existing and coming in, and that his brother was killed and all that. Maybe that's why Mike is technically at Reggie's place, since I think he's only about 13 years old in that first film. But there's nobody living there that we see except for Reggie, and that comes up again in a moment. Second thing was that in that little flashback, as he's reliving that, showing what had happened after he'd kind of been grabbed, after the mirror had been broken, Reggie didn't really seem fazed at all by these little hooded dwarves in the flashback. Just like, oh well, dwarves are here, I may as well try to take them out. So Mike is supposedly cured. He's at this mental hospital, and once he's let out, he's digging up graves to kind of prove that the tall man is taking these bodies, and then he comes across Reggie. So like in the flashback dream at the beginning, he and Reggie, eventually get to Reggie's house, only to find out that it's blown up by the tall man, just like what had happened in that dream or premonition or whatever it was. But Reggie had a family that's now dead. He mentioned the family when they were heading there, but we never saw them in the first film, which of course the first film takes place several years earlier, so maybe that's one part of it, and that since Mike was away, Reggie has started a family. But I don't know, he mentions it when they're driving there, but they were never mentioned before. We never actually see them, but they're dead. Okay, so a lot of that isn't really making sense to me. What happened at the beginning or what happened at the end of the first film, that's fine, because it kind of just gets us where we need to be for the story in this film, which is Mike is free, Reggie's family is dead, the two of them set out on their little road trip to track down and destroy the tall man. Fine, let's not dig too deep into that. We just get us where we need to go. Let's go get the tall man. So then, of course, we get to what is my favorite part when I was a kid, this whole prepping montage. I mean, prepping montages are great in any 80s movies anyways, but this one, that quad barrel shotgun that Reggie makes, I don't know any kid who didn't just dream of having that one day, or any adult even to these days. It's just really cool scene. So now they're going to go out there, they're prepped, they're on a road trip. We get that spooky empty world feel that I mentioned in the first one. For the most part at least, very sparse on characters. He's pretty much empty towns, all being explained away that the tall man is coming into those areas and basically sucking them dry of these corpses. The mysterious deaths, put them in the little canisters, put them in the other dimension, whatever, gets his little army, moves on to another town. But it still gives me that eerie feeling that maybe there's something else happening. Maybe this is all a dream. Maybe they're in another dimension. Who knows? There's something that isn't quite sitting right with me, and I can't quite put my finger on it. But fine. So along the way, of course, Mike is having these dreams, these little premonitions of sorts to kind of guide them on where they need to go and what to keep a lookout for. They often involve this girl who needs their help, and they eventually track down and are able to help. But, 1 minute things feel relatively linear and are moving along fine, and then the next something really strange is thrown in that kind of sidetracks us. It's still a lot of fun, a lot of violence and gore. They kind of, expanded even those little chrome balls as having other kinds that do more than just drill. Yeah, we get, good effects, good gore, good action, a bit more from the first one. We also get another character thrown in as well, this gal who Reggie and Mike pick up, who's heading to this town, and she has a place for them to stay. And the strange thing, though, is also that Reggie, despite looking at the timeline of this film, he just lost his family, and already he's really just wanting to get laid. It's like, dude, you just lost your family. How are you so horny after what looks like maybe a week of driving? But hey, that's him. That's kind of his character. He's always looking to get some from somebody, somewhere, it doesn't matter. And that even comes up in the next film, but that'll be held off from my Phantasm III video. Anyways, so this girl, they just kind of leave her at the place that they were kind of holed up for a while. And, they have their ultimate showdown with the tall man. We get a lot of cool action and gore and just crazy stuff happening. They're running out of there, and the gal had actually tracked them down, drives up to help them escape. But as they're driving away, she's dead, or like a reanimated dead, as she's kind of playing with her hair and pulls off like a chunk of her scalp. And we get this cliffhanger. Is the gang going to be safe? What are they going to do about this, as that the tall man has evidently survived, I guess. But, like the first one, it feels like a lot of this is left open to interpretation. Like how are they, I don't know. It's fine to leave it up to that interpretation, but it's just, even though it's a lot of fun, it's just the beginning of it and the ending of it were very confusing to me, but I still loved it. Like I said, lots of gore, lots of action. It's cool. It felt like it had more going on than the first film. But, like I said, even though I enjoyed checking it out, the beginning and the end were still a bit confusing. Speaking of checking out, thanks for checking out this latest little video, and here's a point where you can sound off in the comments since you've stuck around to the end. What are your thoughts on Phantasm II, especially the beginning and the ending portions? Were you confused about it as much as I was? Did I miss something that maybe explains it more? Or what's your interpretation? And, sound off in the comments. Like, whatever you feel about that. Is this stuff that you just determined from watching the film? Did you read something somewhere online? Was there maybe an interview with with Don Coscarelli that kind of explained it a bit more? But just sound off and let me know what you found out. Anyways, that wraps up volume 2 for this. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that little bell icon to get notification for when I put up part 3, which will be in another week or two. And I will see you in the next one. Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome to the third installment of my rewatches of the Phantasm films as I try to make a bit more sense of them. Because though I have always enjoyed them, there were various aspects of them that never really made sense to me. Whether they were left this way intentionally, to be intentionally vague and kind of open to interpretation, or there were just aspects which simply went over my head and I never really, noticed before. I've covered the first two, so if you haven't seen them, be sure to, go back and check out those videos. And I'm now on to Phantasm III, Lord of the Dead, from 1994.
Where's the balls to call themselves the Lord of anything, huh? Come on. Last time somebody called himself Lord on this planet, he got crucified, Michael, okay? And we know where the hammer and the nails are.
A very simple synopsis came across, only states, Mike and Reggie continue to hunt the mysterious tall man, discovering along the way that the invasion has already begun. So this video may be a little bit short compared to the other two, as this entry seemed to be much more easy for me to follow. But there were some things at the beginning that were a bit strange, such as they retell some of parts 1 and 2 to kind of bring us back up to speed for part 3. Again with the dream stuff, Jody dying in a car wreck and so on from part 1. And of course the beginning of part 2 showing what was supposed to be kind of like this dream or something in Mike's head as he was in this mental institute of Reggie saving him. Seems like they just made that part real, rather than how in the beginning of part 2, actually took place. Because at the beginning of part 2, he's telling it like this is just a dream, none of it was real. But then of course he gets out and he's digging up those graves. Go ahead and check out that previous video. But so it seems like they really tried to clear up what had happened at the beginning of part 2, and it lays out like this. Part 1, most of it was a dream. Jody died in a car accident. The beginning of part 2 was not a dream he was telling while in a mental institute, where he's out, Reggie finds him, they go to his house, but it's blown up. Instead, all of that beginning stuff really happened. And then the rest of part 2 was fine. It happened as we saw it on screen, and that just kind of brings us up into part 2. So now we are getting away from the tall man and his little minions after that car wreck at the end of part 2. But Reggie threatens to blow them all up, and since the tall man needs Mike whole, he lets them go only to try to kind of get at them later. So now we really get into part 3 as it works in kind of like a more and more linear way, I felt. After the accident, Mike's in a coma. He sees Jody in this dreamlike afterlife situation here, and he comes back where the tall man minions, this case it was a nurse, are basically coming after Mike. They escape, they go to Reggie's house. Now this is kind of confusing because his house blew up in part 2. But anyways, Jody's spirit is there and he inhabits or turns into one of the silver balls. Again, very confusing. But then the tall man shows up, takes Mike, kind of disables that Jody ball, so it's just this little chunk that's not even floating around. And Reggie's now heading down to track down Mike with the disabled Jody ball. Yes, we've seen it all before. I'm kidding. Anyways, and also, Reggie has another CUDA, this time a soft top. I'm not sure where that one came from because I know the second one was destroyed, or in the second film, his CUDA was destroyed. But anyways, another weird setup which tries to clarify some of the things from the first film, from the first 2 films, to kind of bring us on to track here and get us, something that's a little bit easier to make sense of. So we got this road trip to track down Mike. He has a disabled Jody ball that at times kind of guides him, almost like a magic 8 ball in a way. He teams up with a kid whose family was taken out as a tall man has been going from town to town, kind of wiping them out. And of course, he also meets this woman named Rocky, who was in a similar situation where her town was kind of taken apart as well. It's all pretty straightforward. And of course, we get more of Reggie just really wanting some action.
Hey, loosen up a little. Ever try vanilla?
So, we get some more cool stuff thrown in. Of course, like we find out this weakness of the tall man, that the cold can really affect him. And that Mike now has a ball kind of inside of his head. It's very weird, very twisted. This weird horror road trip of, for most of this, get a lot of action, gore, a really cool showdown and so on, but nothing that was too hard to understand now that beginning portion was out of the way. It kind of felt like with this one, they were really trying to tie up some loose ends from parts 1 and 2 and those weird interpretations from the ending of part 1, beginning of part 2 especially. But what we get is, another weird ending, of course, that leaves it open for another sequel, in that Reggie is covered in several of those silver balls, kind of pinned up to the corner of the room, and the kid who was kind of helping him out gets grabbed at the end through the glass, similar to how Mike was grabbed at the ending of the first film. So okay, nice cliffhanger, and then we'll go on to part 4. But my overall thoughts here are that it's confusing at the beginning still, particularly after seeing parts 1 and 2 pretty close to this. I'm sure if it had been a couple of years since I'd seen part 2, this little catch up for part 3 would have gone just fine. But they seem to really try to get things back on track, so it kind of makes more sense. We get the good road trip stuff, the gore, the action. We get some cool, interesting characters. Rocky was really cool, especially. Even that kid was really cool. I'm still holding on to the idea that they're kind of in like an alternate dimension, or they're hopping from one reality to another, or one dream to another, kind of happening throughout, especially, these first 3 films. Because of the things from part 1 that didn't really make much sense to me, some of the things about the beginnings of part 2, and the stuff that they kind of change as they are retelling some of those at the beginning of part 3. It kind of gives me a through line to think about for these stories. It's been a little while since I've seen parts 4 and 5, so it'll be interesting to see how those are laid out, if they're going to follow a more linear path, where we can kind of find like a through line for all of this. But that's all I got for this one. Told you it's going to be a bit of a short one. But what about you? What are your thoughts on this? Are you very familiar with part 3? What do you think about it as an entry in this series as a whole? And is there anything about that beginning and what they tried to retell about parts 1 and 2 that didn't make sense, or how do you interpret it? Anyways, sound off in the comments and let me know what you think, and I will see you in the next one for part 4. Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome to the 4th installment of my rewatches of these Phantasm films, in which I try to kind of make a little bit more sense of them, try to wrap my head around them, because though I've always enjoyed them, there are various aspects of them that just kind of went right over my head, or details that I missed, and a lot of things that I just didn't quite understand. So, for this entry, I will be covering Phantasm IV, Oblivion from 1998. So we have about a 4-year break from part 3 on this one, and leaving us at a cliffhanger as usual. And the synopsis for this that I found is quite simple. It simply states, Mike travels through time and dimensions to find the tall man's origins. Okay, not a lot to go on there, but that's pretty much the core of what's kind of going on at this point in this film series. So, and where it actually really shines as well. I think they really opened things up pretty well. So, as with both part 3 before this and 2 before that, we begin with a recap of what had happened before, what had kind of led up to this film. It does kind of rush past a few things, though, to get us on track. So basically, we get a lot of cool flashbacks, particularly from part 1, which includes some footage I don't recognize. From what I remember hearing, they used some previously unused footage from the first film for some of those flashbacks. We get a lot more kind of clarification of what the tall man has been doing, harvesting the dead, and they also play it that Jody was taken from them and turned into that ball like we saw in the last film, and that the tall man wants to turn Mike kind of into somebody on his side, one of his beings to control. So I guess Jody didn't die in the car accident after all? Okay, so I guess there was, because in the first film they said, we had all that stuff, and then they said he died in a car accident. Now they're just saying he was taken. So the ending of it is still a bit confusing to me from the first film, especially some stuff with Reggie and all that. But anyways, so Mike, of course, he has this ball in his head and such, and he just kind of takes off, trying to get away from people so he can't hurt them. Reggie, who was last seen kind of pinned against a wall by all those balls, and then the tall man is walking in. He basically is spared because the tall man says that he has other plans for him. So that's a way to keep him in the story, I guess. But it was interesting because they kind of didn't even mention the blonde girl from part 2, and they didn't mention the kid or Rocky from part 3 on all those flashbacks as they bring us up to what's kind of happening in this film. And of course we get lots more flashbacks along the way from Mike's point of view, stuff that he's remembering from the first film especially. There is mention of the car wreck that Jody was in, but that after that car wreck, that's when the tall man had taken his body to turn him into that ball. Still kind of confusing, but and though you know, we catch up with Reggie. He's just kind of seems done with this whole thing. And Jody has been basically trying to convince him to go after Mike to track him down before the tall man gets to him. And so that's where we kind of pick up. It's like, this is where we're going to head out. We are continuing on this road trip against evil to find Mike before the tall man does. Okay, so we have a goal to head for here, even though just like the previous two films and the ending of the first, things were a little bit confusing to get going. So things play actually pretty straight from here on out, for a while at least. We see, you know, this story and the history kind of expanded quite a bit, you know, involving Mike being able to time travel or seeing into the past, to the Civil War, where Jebediah Morningside had, you know, is also played by Angus Scrimm, our tall man, kind of seeing where he began. And it's a great way to kind of open up this whole storyline a bit more. And also Mike now has powers similar to the Force. So that's new. But that's cool, because you can kill scorpions with rocks. So anyways, it's revealed during this time travel / alternate dimension travels that he's going on that Jesse in fact did not die in the car wreck, that was a lie, that he was simply taken, kind of grabbed like Mike was at the end of part 1. We even get a scene that was previously unused showing him being confronted by the tall man at the end of that first film. But I'm still, like I said, a bit fuzzy on what really happened, since I believe Reggie was stabbed by the blonde woman in the first movie, which turned out to be the tall man. I can just end up talking in circles on this and it still won't make any sense. But, you know, we still have that confusion about what's real, what's not, what's kind of in a dream state, what's in an alternate dimension, what's even happening in this world, since we don't really see many other characters here. I'm still holding on to that weird theory of mine that some of this isn't quite really happening. Anyways, Mike is doing this time travel stuff now to see if there's a way to, since he can't really seem to kill the tall man, can he prevent him from kind of existing in the first place by tracing back to where Jebediah Morningside was, seeing how he developed a portal, had stepped through it, but by the time he came back through, at that point he was the tall man. So maybe there's a way that he can stop the tall man from ever existing by doing this time travel. And then it's eventually learned that Jody in fact did die in the car wreck, like we were told at the end of the first film. We get more transdimensional travel, more time travel stuff going on, lots of weird stuff going on as usual. From what I gather, Jody was kind of used as a way to get Reggie to help find Mike for the tall man. If I'm remembering that right, I literally only watched it yesterday and already some of the details are starting to fade. But anyways, it went from kind of clearing up some things at the beginning and kind of playing things straight for a while to throwing in a lot of other strange stuff and twists and turns throughout the rest of this whole thing, especially looking back at the previous films and trying to link up certain aspects of them. But it still plays pretty well and feels like if one had actually skipped parts 2 and 3, they could still enjoy this one more as like a direct sequel to part 1. It is a little bit slow in the middle 30 minutes, but by the time we get towards that last 30 minutes, it does seem to pick up a bit more. We get a bit more action going on. And we get them attempting to kill the tall man, blowing everything up. But of course he survives, takes the ball out of Mike's head, and just slowly walks off and vanishes through a portal. So now we got Reggie determined to destroy him, going through the portal after the tall man. And Mike, now that this ball has been removed from his head, is seemingly dying and having flashbacks of what his life was like as a kid before all of this stuff had started. So we get some more of the previously unused footage used to show that flashback of him meeting up with Reggie, and the film kind of wraps with this flashback of him and Reggie just kind of riding off into the dark. It's still a lot of fun. Like I said, we had some more straightforward stuff within it, but then they threw in these, you know, left turns here and there that still kind of confused me a bit. But, you know, next up, I'll be dealing with part 5. So, you know, part 5, Ravager, I remember enjoying that one. The last time I saw it was, I believe, almost about a year ago now. And from what I remember, it actually wraps things up pretty nicely. It has something to do with, like, these alternate dimensions, as well as Reggie dealing with dementia. I think we have a really long gap of maybe 12 to 15 years from one film to the other as far as when they were produced. But anyways, that's all that I got for this quick one here. Be sure to like and subscribe and get a notification for when I put up that final installment, which will be in another week or two. But sound off in the comments, what's your take on this entry? Did it make sense to you? Is it clear? Did it make some of the aspects of parts of like the first 3 make more sense to you now or less sense? Or at this point, are you just along for the ride to see whatever they want to do with Tall Man and flying balls drilling into people's heads and everything? Anyways, that's all I got for this one, so thanks for coming by and for sticking around to the end, and I will see you in the next one. Greetings and salutations, everybody. I'm here at the end of my revisit of the Phantasm films, where I tried to pay a little bit closer attention and, kind of watch them in a shorter time frame as well. In this case, about 6 weeks. I'd rewatched all of these and tried to make better sense of them in my head. And this latest one, the final one, was definitely interesting. Of course, I'm speaking of Phantasm Ravager from 2016. Which is the only entry not directed by Don Coscarelli, and the only one where I could see an additional writer listed, which was David Hartman, who also worked as director on this film. So what is this entry about? Well, before we dive into that synopsis, let's just catch up with the ending of part 4 and what kind of led up to this. So, first off, the tall man survived, walked through the portal, so he took off. Reggie grabbed his quad-barrel shotgun and ran into the portal after him. And Mike had the ball removed from his head from the tall man and is seemingly laying there dying and having a moment where he's kind of flashing back to being a kid to before the tall man came to his town, and everything was pretty much okay. And at the end of that little vision, he rides off in the ice cream truck with Reggie. So, the synopsis for Part 5 Ravager simply states, the Phantasm nightmare comes to an end as reality blurs for a hero in search of his friend and out to vanquish a villain who can be two places at once. Okay, so that one was actually from Amazon. IMDb just says it's a final installment, didn't really give us much to go on. But let's break this one down a little bit to see if it makes any sense, which, spoiler alert, it actually did make more sense to me than some of the other ones. So, we get the usual flashbacks for the previous entries to catch us up like we'd seen in, the previous entries. We also get, back onto this road trip to vanquish evil. Reggie's come back to the portal, and though he had to take out this really wimpy kind of car thief guy, he did finally get reunited with his precious Cuda. So, we also get, of course, another attempt by Reggie to just get some tail in the form of a character by the name of Dawn, a woman he met on his journey who he shacks up with for a night at a location where we also get to see a character played by Daniel Roebuck, who also appeared in the Coscarelli films John Dies at the End, as well as Bubba Hotep. And actually, now that I think of it, that car thief guy was also in Bubba Hotep, playing a coroner, I believe, with Daniel Roebuck. Anyways, so it may sound like a little bit of the same old, go on a road trip, vanquish evil, Reggie's trying to get some tail, all that kind of stuff. But there is a lot more going on with this one, as Reggie keeps kind of flipping between coming back through the portal, being on that road trip, trying to track down the tall man, to being in an institute because he has dementia. He's being visited by Mike, and all of the events, all the previous films, it's all just a byproduct of his broken mind, and none of that stuff ever happened. And then we also have him flipping into basically like a post-tall man apocalyptic world. Seemingly after the events of the tall man, coming to the town, after Reggie gets back through the portal, the aftermath of the tall man not being stopped, and what the world has become now that him and his minions have taken over. Giant flying orbs in the sky, those little dwarves everywhere, it's crazy. And it gets pretty heavy with all that. These flips back and forth, they happen very randomly and very suddenly. Mike eventually is talking about stuff that he's read about parallel dimensions kind of being stacked on top of each other. And, how there are points where they touch and kind of create these little bridges. So this is the kind of stuff that's kind of sealing the deal for me about my thoughts of either dreams being involved or alternate dimensions. For instance, we get Dawn in one world, but she's Jane in the other. Same actress, and Reggie even recognizes her. We even get to see, we even get where Reggie sees the portal to this other dimension while he's at the Institute and is able to run through it. Little bits here and there kind of lining up with that thought that there are other dimensions at play here, and maybe that's why some of the other stuff didn't really make any sense. But the bulk of the film is really about the flipping between those different dimensions. And this makes, for me, a lot of the previous films make more sense, such as stuff about Jody. Was the first film just Mike's dream? How did Jody really die? Reggie being stabbed by the blonde woman, yet somehow he survives, and they don't really mention that it ever happened. The Reggie stuff, the stuff that Reggie does and doesn't remember from the first film, just different things about his life that didn't really flesh out. And of course, this idea that a lot of these towns are just empty. There are these little pockets of survivors in a way, but most of the time there's just not many other characters in this film. And there are various other things that seem to kind of make no sense, that I feel like those little plot holes and inconsistencies and so on, if I look back at them like there were these alternate dimensions at play and flipping between them, I can kind of help it. It kind of helps me make more sense out of it, if even that statement makes any sense, no matter how long and rambling it was. But anyways, a few more words before I wrap this up. So this one, Ravager, definitely had a much different feel than any of the previous entries. There was a lot more CG, because not only did they have the means in this one to do CG, they had aspects of the story where it was likely the only way to bring those ideas to the screen. It works in most cases, but there are some where you can kind of feel that budget of the film, that the CG isn't quite that good, which, along with the music and the pacing, it really made this one feel less like that scrappy little indie film thrown together and more like a Sci-Fi Channel film. This one's also very sad, seeing Reggie just kind of slipping away like that, seeing all the actors much older, and also knowing that our tall man himself, Angus Scrimm, had passed away the year that this film had come out. But from the first film to this one, there were 37 years in this franchise. We literally saw Mike, A. Michael Baldwin, grow up, as well as all the other actors. We had 37 years on this. And when you see from those flashbacks, in this, showing what had come before it to the 2016 footage, that change in that time passing in the franchise really does hit kind of hard. This was a long franchise, with many of the same actors in each one of the films. And knowing that these were never blockbuster hits, it kind of felt more personal, like a 37-year-old passion project of sorts, where anybody involved in it was more just wanting to tell this really bizarre story for fun, rather than any expectation of a mega theatrical hit that was going to make everybody rich. And this final entry really brought all of that home. I guess to finish this film itself and this series in general, I'll just say this. Even though this film had a different look and feel compared to the previous ones, and even though some aspects of it I didn't enjoy as well as some of the earlier films, it's still worth checking out. And I feel like it gives a great ending to the franchise, which takes the length of the franchise and the age of the actors and these characters and the confusing aspects of what came before it to heart as they try to put this last film together. Now, the franchise as a whole can be a bit confusing at times, but if you're introducing somebody to this franchise, if you just kind of let them in on the aspect that there's some possible alternate dimensions and dream stuff and illusions happening, they might make better sense of it and be in it for the long run and want to check out all of them eventually. And, there are ups and downs in each one of these films, whether it's not having A. Michael Baldwin reprise his role in Part 2, or wishing that Rocky had continued on and had more screen time, or had some screen time in Part 4 and more than just a cameo in Part 5, or even like the way that the CG was used in Part 5 in particular. But overall, my words on this are, these films are some of the strangest, most interesting, and most original horror films I've ever seen. They were never afraid to try something new by taking it in a different direction, which may not make sense. The continuation of so many plot points throughout the entire series, and including so many of the original actors from the original film, held on to its roots while exploring those new avenues, and throwing in that haunting soundtrack and this feel that the filmmakers are mainly interested in bringing the films they wanted to screen the way that they wanted, and we get what feels like a very personal film series, which, while at times many aspects really don't make much sense, they are more than worth checking out. And speaking of checking out, thanks for checking out my latest and final entry in revisiting these Phantasm films. Thanks for sticking around over these past 7 or 8 weeks as I've been slowly putting these videos up there. And if you're not already subscribed, go ahead and subscribe and hit that little bell icon to get notifications for when I put up that new content, which is usually once or twice a week. And also sound off in the comments. What's your take on Phantasm Ravager and just the series as a whole? Get some conversation going. Anyways, it's definitely time to wrap this one up. And thanks for coming by, and I'll see you in the next one.